If you have a small workshop like me, then you'll know that space is at a premium, and any jig that you can make to save it, well, that's always welcome. In this video, I'm going to show you the best jig that I've ever come up with, as well as the 5 reasons why I think you should build it immediately. And stick around, because I guarantee number 5 will blow your mind. Before we get into the build, I'll cover reason number 1, which is accuracy. Palm routing by hand is something that is tricky to get right, especially if you're new to woodworking. And the last thing that you want to do at the end of a woodworking project is trip at the finish line and mess up a route. To start this build, you'll want to find a piece of timber the right size. Unfortunately, I didn't have any leftover plywood from when I built my workbench, so I've been down to B&Q this morning and spent £20 on this piece of hardwood plywood. It is obviously a little bit bigger than the size I need, so the first thing I'm going to do is cut this down. As you can see, the board that I've cut isn't currently sitting flat against the top of the table saw. And the reason for that is because the JobsitePro has these 2 corners that need to be removed. These little table saw flaps, if you will. It is quite simple to remove these with either a jigsaw or, in my case, a bandsaw. The reason that I opted for the bandsaw over the jigsaw is, in my experience, I tend to have far less tear out using the bandsaw, and I'm honestly just too lazy to look through my jigsaw bits a lot of the time to find the perfect one. The great thing about this build, and reason number 2, is it is incredibly cheap. In fact, most of the cost is in this board alone. And if you happen to have some plywood or scrap lying around, then it's barely going to cost you anything. At this point, you want to come underneath the table saw. You can see my bit of wood just here. What I wanted to do is just draw a line here and here, just to mark out where those tracks of the fence are going to be. I'm also going to draw a line right down here, and that's just going to mark out the area that is actually going to be accessible when this thing is installed. I've also got my router, and I'm going to hold it up to the top here just to make sure that that fits nicely, and roughly estimate that I want that in about 25 mil from this edge here. The reason I'm showing you this is you might have a different router to the Bosch router that I'm using, so this is your opportunity just to check that everything is going to fit before you make all of the next cuts. Reason number 3 is this router table is very secure. As you can see, because of how snug the fit is, this router table isn't going anywhere. And unlike the other router table that I made for the DeWalt table saw, there's no need to fix this down to the table saw itself. Now it's time to attach your palm router to the board that we've been making. In order to do this, you are going to need to remove the base of your router just to determine where all of your screw holes, as well as the big router hole, will need to be cut out. Then, using a Forstner bit, drill through where that big router hole needs to be removed. One mistake that I made when making this is I should have had a sacrificial piece of wood underneath this plywood just to avoid it blowing out when I drilled through the other side. So don't make that same mistake and make sure that you've got one set up. If you don't have a Forstner bit like I'm using here, then you can use your palm router and just increase the size of the router bit that you're using, like I did on my DeWalt video. And once you've got that big hole drilled, you can then mark out exactly where your 4 screws need to be connected. Drill through each mark with the appropriate size drill bit, and then fix the base to the board using some machine screws. I'm using these M4 30mm long machine screws. It is worth pointing out that your palm router might be different to mine, so I do recommend this multi-pack of machine screws that I picked up from Screwfix. I'll have a link in the description below so you can check that out after you're done here. And this turned out to be really handy because it allowed me to test out the thickness of the screws as well as the perfect length, so I wasn't spending ages tightening them up. And just quickly, if you've made it this far, please do consider hitting the subscribe button. I'm going for 50,000 subs this year and you can help me get there. Reason number 4 is convenience. Everything you need to access the router and the table saw, including all of the power leads and on buttons, is all conveniently placed on the same side. Like, everything is right there, exactly where you need it. So you don't have multiple trailing cables all over your workshop. And one really nice thing that honestly I didn't plan, it just ended up this way, is you can use the cable tidy that's on the actual table saw to also keep your router table, use the table tidy, cable tidy. Oh my God, this is impossible to say. You can use the cable tidy on both. You know what I'm saying. And before I forget to mention it, you can find all of the plans for this router table now included in the plans for this workbench. At this point, this router table is perfectly usable. However, there is one massive feature that I've saved to the end on purpose, and that is its ability to use alongside the SAWSTOP fence. As you can see though, there are a couple of things that we need to modify before this will work correctly. Firstly, as you can see, the fence does hit the top of the router table. So you are going to need to come back to either your jigsaw or bandsaw to remove yet another 2 corners of that router table. Now, something that I have noticed, which honestly is pretty annoying because I measured this to be 18mm thick, is that actually the router table does stick up about 1 millimeter from the top of the table saw. This doesn't actually prevent you using the fence with it. There is a little bit of a gap under the fence, which means you can just sort of push it over the top and it still locks in. But because I know a lot of you are perfectionists, I am going to address this just to make sure that it does sit perfectly flat. And to do that, I am going to need to make a couple of cuts on the underside of this. So I'll show you how to do that. So you can see that I've now taken that router piece off of this piece of timber. And if I lay this in, I can now very clearly see where I need to mark. So actually take out about 1 mil from the underside of this plywood, and that should then prevent this from sticking up a little bit. And remember, you're only taking off about 1 mil from the underside. So don't whack your blade right up. Literally, you just want it ever so slightly poking out. If you have to, do a couple of test cuts on a scrap piece of plywood first. You don't really want to mess it up at this stage. Now I've taken that little bit out of the underside. This should now lay perfectly flat, but we'll see. Oh, like a glove. That is perfect. I'm very happy with that. Once you've done this, your board will sit lovely and flat on the top of the table saw, and your fence can be pushed up right against that router bit. And if you are interested in building the workbench that I've been using throughout this video, then you can watch me build that by clicking here next. Until next time, happy building.